Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Today is 16th of August. This is the first of what we sometimes refer to as a big moon. So you got the big moons. It's a new moon and full moon, and in between we've got the half moons, waning and waxing moons, and so within our tradition, in particular the big moons, quote unquote, are quite special days for us in the sense that we have our different precept ceremonies. So for the bhikkhus and for the monks, we have the recitation of the 227 training rules, the Patimokkha. And for the Siladhara, with just one Siladhara here, there's no recitation. But if there were four of you, there would be a recitation. So up at Amravati or wherever there are four Siladhara, they would do their recitation. So then the Samaneras have their Samanera training recitation, and then Anagarikas and Anagarika. Also, they reestablish their eight precepts. It's really the same as what was done this evening with the members of the lay community. So this happens every fortnight. So it's a special day for us. It's been a long day. So also now that we're in the Vasa, the traditional monsoon season rains retreat that we follow, it's a 3-month period, and many I think it's safe to say most of our communities place emphasis on studying the monastic rule, the monastic code. And so today we had our second session. We had our first one was last Saturday. Today we had our second session, the male community. And I found it really, really interesting approach today around considering how the rules, the rules and observances, and one aspect we were really considering was, okay, how can it be used to develop in Dhamma? So in our tradition, in the Theravada tradition, the southern tradition, the Buddha, when he was still alive, he referred to his teaching as Dhamma and Vinaya, Dhamma Vinaya, or Dhamma and discipline. And so it wasn't one or the other. And there's one image within the suttas of, it's like two wheat sheaves. You've harvested, you've cut the wheat, you wrap them up into sheaves, and you two leaning together. In some countries, that's a way of keeping them off the ground, so that there's a bit of airflow. So they'll lean them together until they can be picked up and taken for storage. And one supports the other. If you take away one, the other one falls down. And I find that a very helpful image when we're considering this training. And it's not just about monastic training. I think this is something that's really important. That if we're leading a spiritual life, the life of somebody developing a spiritual life, if we're completely ignoring one aspect, either Dhamma or Vinaya, it's not complete. It's not complete. And let's take it out of the context of Buddhism, I would suggest, just for a moment, is that, that if we don't have an ethical side, a side of conduct, a side of developing, wholesome conduct, conducive conduct, and if we're only developing the other sides that we might say, well, my spiritual side, but ignoring our conduct, this is not complete, and it typically doesn't lead to peace. There's an element of confusion and also quite potentially leading to bad karma. But it's really, I found that exercise this afternoon. We set up into different groups, and maybe 4 people to each group or whatever, and to consider and to choose one of the training rules. Then to consider, okay, how does that develop Dhamma? How does that develop? What Dhamma elements are in there? Because if we just live by the rules without considering these things, we can just become a bunch of rule keepers. And here again, I'm speaking to both the lay precepts and the monastic precepts. We just become rule keepers, and we're not developing the heart, developing the mind, letting go, learning to really use the precepts to realize Dhamma. To realize what the Buddha was pointing at. This is all. It all has a purpose. So precepts, as a tool to awakening to peaceful way of being, and not just temporarily, peaceful, but this if we really take it to heart and take it right to the culmination of the path. That it's an unshakable state. It's not temporary. It's an unshakable peace, unshakable discernment. So it's also to really consider, for here again, whatever precepts we're living on. 5 precepts for the lay community. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but a few times in my life, not many, but a few times in my life, I've had people say, "Oh, I'm only living on the 5 precepts." And each time I said, "That's amazing. That's extraordinary that somebody's living on the 5 precepts." And the exercise I go through is can you imagine the world if the entire world lived on the first precept? Of not killing any living beings. If the entire world, and I encourage us, I'll encourage whoever said it to me, imagine this, or whatever group I'm talking to, just to imagine that for a few minutes. Take 2 minutes to think what the world would be like. And then to do that with the second precept. Imagine the world if there was no one on the planet that was stealing, taking what was not given. And then to go through all 5 precepts, and so the profundity of, I feel, of, if we really take these to heart, the 5 precepts, amazing. 8 precepts, then you're getting into renunciation precepts. Then there's that element of actually giving up things which are not unethical, but that can support a spiritual life. Kind of simplification of life. It really simplifies things. There's more restraint, more composure, and this leads to calm. It's challenging, but it can lead to this really profound calm, and that's what it's designed for. And then the 8 precepts are the Anagarikas and Anagarika. They're living on the 8 precepts, and of course they have other observances, because we have all our rules here within the monastery. What are community standards, and then there's also the monastic element of undertaking. It is a monastic training, even though the precepts are lay precepts, 8 precepts, and they're technically still lay people, but living a monastic form. So that adds a whole different element, of conformity. There's an element of conformity. And I know when I was growing up and into my 20s, the word to conform and conformity had a pejorative, negative tone to it. Typically, oh, you're such a conformist, or you're just conforming. But if we use conformity skillfully, Because as a word, it's neutral. As a word, it's neutral, but culturally, it can be held in different ways. And so it would people. And when I grew up, 60s and 70s, so to be a nonconformist was really, that's good. You're a nonconformist. And I'm sure there's cases where that is appropriate. So if we're living in a society maybe that's really unskillful or unwholesome, and to not conform to that unwholesomeness, then nonconformity is positive. So I'm pointing at the way we use these words there's different contexts, but within, for instance, within living with precepts, to conform. So that's what can actually allow us to live together. We've got, on any given night, we're between 30 and 35 people living here. And so there's 21 members of the monastic community this rains retreat. And we can travel in between monasteries, and we can travel outside the monastery, and we can live harmoniously. We can act in ways that are really conducive to peace and kindness and all really wholesome qualities. It really reduces our chances of falling into bad karma, generating, doing actions through body, speech, in particular, they'll bring negative result within our lives and be painful. Brings negative results in other people's lives. And having boundaries, so I like to think of whichever form of precepts we're working with, if we are working with them, if we're living with them, is that it creates boundaries. That's one way of framing it. And we bump up against them. We have an impulse to do something like, for instance, let's just take the precept around killing living beings, so which is in all of the forms, obviously. All of the ethical precepts are contained with each and every one of the various forms that I've mentioned this evening. And so let's say there's something annoying. Like they would say there's a mosquito or something, and you're lying in bed at night, and there's a mosquito flying around in the dark, and it keeps getting in your ear and getting near you, or you can feel it alighting on you, and we might have an impulse to kill that. With that precept, then we go, all right, okay, I've undertaken these precepts to not do that, even though the impulse might be, this is bothering me, I would really like it to not be there. You might have the impulse to go like, but we don't. We have a boundary. So this is a very crude and basic example. And you can use it for any one of the rules. Like if we maybe have, around speech, maybe there's something that's embarrassing for us to admit to or share, or maybe we've done something, that we feel, it would be better if I let somebody know, but we don't want to, or we lie. If something comes up and we actually lie about that. So there's that impulse. Okay, like we were talking as a male monastic group, and for the bhikkhus, every fortnight we do a confession to one other monk, and the Siladra do the same thing. And so you get together before the recitation of the rule. You get together with one other bhikkhu, one other monk, and you confess any training rules that you've broken over the last fortnight. And sometimes a couple of us commented, sometimes it's the case. So you get together with a monk, and there might be something you don't really want to say to them, like you'd rather not. But that's exactly when we should, right? To let that go, to let that out. And it could, because this actual ceremony it's non-judgmental. It's not, the other monk, it doesn't go, well, what are you doing, or you're, or criticize you in any way, shape, or form. It's more, okay, to that recognition. And if anything, praiseworthiness of revealing. And most of our precepts, just in case people are really new to this, most of our precepts are really, they have no ethical content. If you actually, I'd be interested to actually add up how many number have an ethical content and how many don't. But a lot of them are just really practical. It's about just really how to live harmoniously, appropriately, skillfully. And the ethical precepts that we do have are an expansion of the 8 precepts. Which only contains 4 or 5 ethical precepts even within that. And so, but yet it's that recognition that if we do maybe act inappropriately, unskillfully, is that oftentimes we want to hide that. But is that growth in spiritual life? That hiding of things, that unwillingness to admit fault, this self-preservation. It's a form of self-preservation, and it makes sense. If we feel we might be embarrassed, or we are feeling embarrassed, we might feel a sense of this really wishing to hide something. So one of the terms in the Pali scriptural tradition, and I would imagine that a different language or a different form appears in other Buddhist traditions, but this hiri-ottappa, and it's 2 words co-joined, and there's various translations. Like a lot of the Pali language, or most languages, you can translate into different ways. And the sort of Victorian translation is shame and moral dread. And that never really worked for me. I can kind of get it, but it's more a sort of a healthy sense of shame, a more healthy sense of wrongdoing. Conscience is another word. Conscious is one of the translations. And then ottappa is often a sense of concern for the welfare of others, like how our behaviors affect others. So here is more our self, how it affects our self, and framing it within our own mind and heart, and then the ottappa is how that affects others. And this can be developed. It's not just that we're born with a certain dose of hiri-ottappa and that's it. No, it's something that we really can develop, and it's. I venture to say I don't feel it's actually hard to develop. I'm sure somebody could contest that. But if we care about ourselves, we care about others. So another translation for hiri is self-respect. It's a sense of wrongdoing, but that self-respect of, to shrink back from acting in ways through body and speech that are harmful to us, harmful to others, because even if we can do a lot of things where even if nobody knows, it's actually quite harmful for us. And so to develop these hiri-ottappa, as we're, if we take a form, like let's say we picked up precepts, we were living by precepts, and to consider, because if we say, well, I'm going to follow these precepts, but not those precepts, and then that, what's that about? That sort of cherry picking precepts, or thinking that maybe one is really silly or stupid or something. Wait a second. Well, especially within the monastic form. If we, so why did we come just to sort of filter out the things that we don't like? Because even if we struggle to find meaning within, especially for the bhikkhus and siladhara, the hundreds of precepts, even if we struggle to find meaning to some of them, even just letting go of that letting go of that kind of righteousness that can sometimes develop, or refusal, like, wow, I'm not going to follow this. This one's, that sort of judgmental aspect of our mind. It's just to use Dhamma to really reflect on that and say, well, but can I follow it anyway? Do I have to like it? Do I have to even understand it fully? Do I have to approve of it to follow it? So in a way, I find that when we're going against the grain and doing things that we don't want to do, or following a routine that we don't want, or following rules that maybe we don't like, or maybe whatever it is, bumping up against the unwanted, the unliked. That's when I find personally that I grow more. This is because that's where it's harder to let go, but when we're able to let go of that view, that impulse, or that action, I feel is really when we can move forward. And I'm using forward figuratively because, as we know, that Dhamma is not about getting anywhere, but it's this release. That's why oftentimes, this is the release into peace. We're letting go of that clinging, so the suffering, the dukkha, discontent, unsatisfactoriness. We're clinging. And so also to let go of our clinging to our views around rules. Because nobody's asking us to do something unwholesome. And so, when, especially like the bhikkhus and the siddhadhara, because there's the precepts and then there's all sorts of permutations, and it goes into when you look at every different permutation and sort of sub-rule, within that sub-offense, it goes into the thousands, and people go, wow, why would you want to pick that up? Where's the freedom in that? And here again, especially, in the time I grew up and where I grew up in California, the same with conforming, is that why would you want to live on rules? Be free. But is that really freedom? Just doing what we want? That's a type of freedom, but it's not inner freedom necessarily. And I would say that the inner freedom, can we actually live freely within restraint? Especially in this monastic form, where there's a lot of don'ts. There's a lot of things. Don't do this, can't do that. But then just the freedom of, it's hard to describe actually, because just each year, and also speaking with other people who have been in monastic life, just this freedom to not have to do, the freedom to not need to do something, to not follow through with a desire. So it's transcending desire. It's like, so there's a desire, an impulse to do something. Even there's nothing immoral about eating dinner. This is not one of the ethical precepts. Okay, as I said, most of the ethical precepts, it's really boils down to a much smaller number than the number of precepts we have. Just the freedom to not be able to do things, and it's a great simplification, because, as we all know, the options we have, and now with the internet and just the way so much at our fingertips, and travel and everything, just it's option paralysis. It's almost endless. But is it peaceful? Possibly yes, depending on how we hold it. So not saying we have to not use those things, that we should not travel or not use the internet, or not exercise our options, but it's quite endless. It's quite limitless. And so through whichever, whether we're living in the broader community as a layperson, or whether we're living in the monastery, just to consider how we're living. within the monastery, consider how much are we using, for instance, the internet. We have 6 days a week. We have access to the internet. There's rules around how many hours a day, and the hours within the day that we can access it. It depends on how senior we are, how junior. Yeah, what are we looking at? What are we reading? How are we spending our time? And that applies also in the broader community. Yeah, how are we using our time? So that chant that we do, the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? And this is one of the 10 reflections that we're supposed to reflect on frequently. And so, yeah, where am I placing my attention? What attitudes am I holding? How am I responding to things internally and externally? How am I responding to things that I don't like or don't think are right? How am I holding that? How am I expressing myself? Because we're expressing what's inside, and expressing it outwardly. If it's it's not that we shouldn't express our opinions, but how are we doing that? And why are we doing that? Are we trying to gain approval? Let's say we disapprove of something and we're very critical, and we want to go and have a little bit of a whinge or a rant with somebody else. So why are we doing that? Is there a way of considering that skillfully, like sitting down with a person and discussing something skillfully and saying, well, what do you think about this? Instead of, if we're using situations like that to gain approval or support for a particular view, a particular criticism. So having boundaries, having guides. And then, sometimes, we'll cross them sometimes, in that image of like crossing a speed bump. Oh, right, was what I just said, was that skillful? So like with speech, in the precept that was recited tonight, it was only to refrain from lying. But right speech, it contains also, divisive speech. And is it divisive? Is it harsh? Is it cruel? Is it useless? So, like idle chatter, sambapalapa in the Pali language, and so there's different aspects to right speech, and so and that's the sort of tool of communication. Obviously, typically, of course, we can write things, but that's considered speech. So we have precepts around speech, but when we're thinking, I like to consider that it's that internal dialogue, the internal monologue, typically, and it leaves a mark. So it's good to also consider, internally, like precepts. So let's also take the precept on lying. Are we lying to ourselves? So several times in my monastic life, people have, if they've been curious about, for instance, the ceremony that we do, like I mentioned this morning, where there's the recitation of the monastic rule, but before that we confess. They're like, well, so you confess, and they'll ask about that, and I've mentioned that typically we're confessing things that nobody else knows. Like if we've broken a rule, typically, almost always, nobody else knows we've broken that rule. And so I've mentioned this recently, and so if you've heard this recently from me, I do apologize, but I think it's worth repeating. Is that they'll say, well, why? If nobody knows, why are you telling somebody? What are you doing that for? And I say, well, yeah, but isn't there someone who knows? We know. So do we want to hold something like that in the mind and the heart? So there was this really cute family, well, cute kids, it was family, came yesterday, and there was two families actually, and there was three daughters, and then the other family was one boy, and the girl and the boy were about 10 years old, and the other kids were very young, sort of toddlers. And the girl in particular, she was just really full of questions, so I was hanging out for 15 minutes chatting with her. And we got onto this topic. She was very bright, around in particular about, not lying, to be respectful and things. Because the way she asked her questions, we got into this quite adult topic. And we talked about that, and I said, yeah. So I asked her, if you lie, and you think nobody knows, but isn't there someone who knows? And then she finally got it. And she goes, oh, right, I know. And so, for instance, with our confession as bhikkhus and the Siladhara, is the actual ceremony is in Pali scriptural language. And we're confessing categories of offenses, whole categories, because there's several categories of offenses, and they have varying degrees of severity. But our standard here is that before we do that, we actually say which individual rules we've broken. We say it in English. We say that in English, and it's that here again, that letting go, that honesty, but. If we're lying to ourselves, and if we, for instance, say, it doesn't really matter. It's such a minor rule. It's not important that I let somebody else know this. This is I feel a real red flag. That if we catch ourselves doing that, and here again, this is not just as monastic, but as in the lay community. And so seem to have fallen. I wasn't quite sure where this sharing was going to go this evening, but seemed to have kind of fallen into certain aspect. But yeah, just really to remember, just to kind of wind up this talk, just to really remember that using precepts, really Dhamma Vinaya. So it's the Dhamma element, leading towards calm, leading towards insight, leading towards like this unshakable peace, using the precepts. It has a social element. It's not just about us realizing Nibbana or anything, but it has a social element. And I often speak about this, what the Buddha referred to as the gift of fearlessness, abhaya dana. So abhaya means fearless, and dana is the generosity. So it's the offering of fearlessness, and so it has a massive. There's a social element, there's a Dhamma element, peace. So it's to use this. It's for our well-being. It's for other beings, or for the well-being of all beings. And so to use these forms, these structures, for what they were meant for. It was not just about getting good at conforming and all, marching to the same beat or anything, but like that. It really is meant as an aid to awakening, so that we can realize what is available. We can realize what's available. So I think I can close there.